As the 20-year anniversary of the horrors of genocide in Rwanda were marked in 2014, and with the recent Charlie Hebdo killings in Paris sparked by religious intolerance, the Ethical Journalism Network has launched a 5-point test to help journalists and editors to identify speech that aims to generate intense hatred or incite violence. Ethical Journalism Network Director Aidan spoke at the Press Club Brussels to launch his organisation's latest initiative.
Remember, we've never seen anything like it. Journalists hunted down and killed deliberately, and so on. But let's have some perspective and context. Europe is, the impression that you're getting now in much of the sort of political debate is that Europe is under siege, is a terrible sort of terroristic sort of movement and so on. Actually, it has always been a problem. If you look back over the years, you know, the question of terroristic violence has always been there. Red Brigades, Red Army Fraction. In 1974, the IRA killed more soldiers and individuals in the United Kingdom than have died altogether, civilians and soldiers, in the current war on terror since it started. So let's have some perspective. Let's recognize that European population, even here in Belgium, troops on the streets, it's not the first time we've had troops on the streets here in Belgium and so on. So let's have some clear perspective that we are not undergoing something which is particularly threatening and particularly special. Therefore, journalists have to look at the perspective, and they also have to look clearly at the context. Secondly, journalists have to show humanity in telling the story. One of the difficulties we saw last week, or the week before last, is the way in which the direct, fast journalism that came into play in telling the story led to some things that maybe shouldn't have been published. The execution of the policeman lying on the floor. There was a big set of questions. Some media treated it quite differently. Some media didn't show it at all. Some media showed him brutally being executed across the internet. There was absolutely a lack of humanity in the way this particular scene of violence was shown and shared.
Aidan, you're the director of the Ethical Network Against Journalism. You have a number of points to make concerning the, shall we say, the suppression of hate speech and hateful dialogue. Do you not feel that it is in fact the journalists' responsibility to represent hateful speech?
No, I mean, I think it's, as I was saying, the Ethical Journalism Network stands for promoting good journalism which is ethical, and ethical journalism is not about the inhumanity of hate speech. It's not about creating intense hatred, and it's not about inciting people to violence. In fact, good ethical journalism is actually the reverse of that. It's about promoting dialogue and encouraging tolerance between different communities and so on. And that's needed more than ever these days, following the terrible events in Paris and so on. Journalists face terribly difficult struggle to maintain ethical balance at a time when they're under political pressure to take one side or another. They're subject to manipulation by terrorist groups themselves. These are media-savvy groups that are trying to use the media to satisfy their own interests. And there's a lot of uncertainty and fearfulness within the audience, and the European audience in particular. So journalists mustn't contribute to making people feel more fearful. I'll do that again. I think journalists must not contribute to making people feel more fearful or uncertain. They've actually got to help them to engage in dialogue so that they better understand the situation.
I take your point, obviously, but I believe my point still stands. Surely you have to let people make their own minds up, and also, certainly, journalists cannot be held responsible if they have to represent people who are being hateful. Surely that's the essence of news, isn't it?
You have to put what people say in context. As I say, politicians and religious leaders have a special responsibility. Just because they say something outrageous doesn't make it newsworthy. Journalists have to decide what the news is. And actually, the news should be a process of reporting the news should be a process of illumination. It should help people to understand things. It shouldn't contribute to making them more uncertain or more fearful. people. So, I think I disagree with you that journalism is only about just putting everything in front of people and leaving people to make up their own minds. People receive information in the context of the social, political conditions, which sometimes are very difficult. It's for journalists to understand that the context in which people are receiving information sometimes mean they have to place that information before them in a proper context, which will help them to understand it, which will reduce ignorance and reduce fear and promote more tolerance and dialogue. That's actually the big challenge we face.
So would you say, therefore, that if journalists do follow your example, there is a chance that they would in fact reduce the amount of hate and hateful speech in the world? Is that your ultimate aim?
Well, of course. I think that journalism is a progressive force. By telling people what's going on, by informing them without deceptive handling of the facts, without being biased, without showing any form of inhumanity, and without promoting division and violence, journalism can make a real contribution to improving people's lives. And I think it does make a real contribution to improving people's lives. And so the more we're ethical, the more we think about the consequences of what we do, the more we're likely to have an impact which is going to promote peace and tolerance.